Are you ready? Welcome to Conflict Nexus Report, where we bring latest updates about global world crises and latest news. Hang tight for what we have for you today. After nearly 3 years of devastating civil war, Sudan has reached a historic turning point. On January 11th, 2026, Prime Minister Kamil Idris stood in Khartoum and declared, "Today, we return." The government of hope returns to the national capital. This announcement marks the end of a long exile that began when war erupted in April 2023, forcing the government to flee to Port Sudan. But this return is more than a political milestone. It is a powerful symbol of resilience for a nation that has endured one of the worst humanitarian crises on earth. So how did Sudan reach this moment? And what does it mean for the country's future? To understand the significance of this return, we need to go back to April 15th, 2023. That day, simmering tensions between two powerful military factions exploded into full-scale war. On one side stood the Sudanese armed forces, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. On the other was the Rapid Support Forces, a powerful paramilitary group led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti. Just 2 years earlier, these same men had cooperated in a coup that overthrew Sudan's civilian-led transitional government. But their alliance collapsed into a brutal struggle for power. When fighting broke out in Khartoum, the capital was transformed almost overnight into a battlefield. The RSF rapidly seized control of large sections of the city, forcing the government to evacuate more than 800 kilometers east to Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast. For nearly 2 years, Khartoum became a war zone. The three cities that form the capital region, Khartoum, Omdurman, and Bari, were carved up by front lines. Artillery fire echoed across the Nile. Entire neighborhoods were besieged. Millions fled their homes. The human toll was immense. Tens of thousands are believed to have died in the capital alone, though no precise count exists. Families were often forced to bury loved ones in makeshift graves scattered throughout residential areas. As Khartoum burned, Sudan plunged into what aid agencies now describe as the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. More than 12 million people were displaced, 9 million within Sudan itself, and more than 3 million fleeing to neighboring countries like Chad, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. It became the fastest-growing displacement crisis ever recorded. At the same time, hunger spread rapidly. 25 million people, half the country's population, now face acute food insecurity. 4 million children are suffering from severe malnutrition, with hundreds of thousands at risk of starvation. Sudan's health system collapsed. Most hospitals shut down. Cholera, measles, and malaria spread unchecked. Vaccination rates fell to their lowest levels in 4 decades. Death toll estimates vary widely, but former U.S. officials believe between 150,000 and 400,000 people may have died since the war began, from violence, disease, and hunger combined. Both sides of the conflict have been accused of war crimes. Civilians were deliberately targeted. Sexual violence became widespread. Hospitals, schools, and water facilities were destroyed. Children were recruited into armed groups. In January 2025, the United States formally determined that the RSF and allied militias had committed genocide in Darfur, particularly targeting non-Arab ethnic communities. By late 2024, the tide of the war began to shift. Using armed drones and coordinated offensives, the Sudanese armed forces launched a campaign to retake Khartoum. Neighborhood by neighborhood, RSF forces were pushed back. In March 2025, the military announced it had liberated much of the capital. By May, it declared Khartoum largely under government control. These victories came at a heavy cost, with reports of reprisals and summary executions against suspected RSF collaborators. Elsewhere, the war continued. The RSF retained control over much of Darfur and parts of Kordofan. In October 2025, RSF forces captured El Fasher, the last major government-held city in Darfur, after a brutal siege. Reports of massacres and ethnic cleansing soon followed. Still, with Khartoum back under government control, preparations began for the state's return. Between March and October 2025, more than 1 million displaced residents returned to the capital. What they found was a shattered city. Electricity, water, and sanitation services remain unreliable. Many government buildings are too damaged to use, forcing ministries to operate from temporary locations. Entire neighborhoods are scarred by destroyed homes and improvised cemeteries. The United Nations estimates it would take at least $350 million just to restore basic services. Despite this, Prime Minister Idris struck a hopeful tone. He pledged that 2026 would be the year of peace in Sudan, promising to stabilize the economy, curb inflation, rebuild hospitals and schools, and allow displaced families to return safely. The government also hopes Sudan will be readmitted to the African Union this year, after being suspended due to the conflict. Yet the challenges ahead remain enormous. The civil war is not over. The RSF still controls vast territories. Fighting continues. Civilians are still being killed. The humanitarian crisis remains severe. Regional and international powers have proposed peace plans calling for a humanitarian truce and a transition back to civilian rule. But previous ceasefires have repeatedly collapsed. For millions of Sudanese, the government's return offers something rare after years of suffering: cautious hope. But hope alone will not rebuild homes, restore livelihoods, or bring back those who were lost. Sudan remains what many aid groups call a forgotten war, receiving far less global attention than other conflicts. Now, Sudan stands at a crossroads. The return of the government to Khartoum could mark the beginning of recovery and reconciliation, or it could become just another chapter in a long and painful tragedy. For now, millions of Sudanese wait. They wait for peace. They wait for food and medicine. They wait for their children to return to school. They wait to go home. The government has returned to Khartoum. The question is, will peace follow? Don't forget to like, comment, share, and turn on the subscribe button to be notified whenever we drop latest news.